So how can somebody know if their love or what they're experiencing as love is a fantasy or if it's connected with reality?
Well, that's actually really different for everyone, isn't it?
Mm,
I think that's the best place to start. I mean,
yeah.
sometimes people have a tendency to check out in fantasy more because of trauma that they haven't really addressed, or situations in childhood or adolescent years that might require them to hang on to fantasy a little bit longer,
Mm,
than some other people. So I think a lot of people approach it differently. That's why I really love when we look at people individually and unpack their developmental parts first,
right.
before we really take a look at that. But generally speaking, this might sound like a weird answer, but unless you are really suffering with a substance use disorder and really checked out here, you'd be surprised at how many people know when they're hanging on to fantasy.
Mm,
I've been riding crazy train with people that I just want them to be different. And I know in the core of what I'm doing that this is probably wasn't going to be the best thing for me, especially in my younger years. But man, I had a muscle for hanging on and believing in somebody else more than I could believe in myself. And that's the sneaky part of fantasy.
yeah.
Does that make
And
sense?
it does make sense. Yeah. I could see that. And I guess why do we cling on or hold on so much, do you think?
Well, I clinged on because I lost my dad when I was young, and my mom committed suicide when I was a teenager. I didn't want to lose somebody. If I felt
Mm,
like somebody was going to be there for me and really love me, I did. That loss was such a pain body wound for me.
mm,
And many people cling on for different reasons. Some people cling on because they just really don't want to be alone for different reasons. Sometimes, maybe they've had two or three failed relationships and they just really want to get this one right because they were raised by an overly critical parent and they don't feel good about who they are or might have low self-esteem. There's so many reasons why one might cling on.
right. I already love that you're not throwing out blanket answers and that you're like, well, it's very specific to the individual. And I think that
Mm.
that is rare these days with advice practitioners like podcasts. It's always this is the way and this is how. And I just love that you're really, I can tell you really put a focus on understanding the individual.
Yeah, it's so key. I was given advice.
Mm,
Much of the advice I was given at times just was so far from what I needed. And
mm,
talk about shame strapping. I mean, literally, Lori Jean, you're addicted to love. You can't have love. You have to be without a relationship to get well. Granted, I needed to focus on myself, absolutely. But to think that I was addicted to something I never really understood and definitely wasn't in at the current time was not helpful. So that's just one
interesting. Yeah.
tiny example. There's so many. Oh, that's your anxiety. Well, what does that mean? Like, what anxiety? With who and why? And who's that person I'm anxiously attaching to? Are they really a good, reciprocal, trusting person? Are they just somebody that's an acquaintance that I'm trying to fill that hole and void inside of me, right? There's
Mm,
just so many different ways of looking at it. So thank you for calling that out. It's very important to me to pivot, that we really look at the person as a whole.
yeah. And I
Mm-hmm.
can already tell that. And I have your book right here, Healthy Adult, for
Aw.
everybody tuning in. Make sure you read it and get it. It's really good. The tagline or the tagline is to pivot from fantasy to reality, confusion to clarity, and isolation to connection. The part that really struck with me was the fantasy to reality part. And that's why I opened with that question, is because I feel just from my own research, my own experience, and things that that's really one that a lot of people get lost in, whether they're aware of it or not. They might be aware that they're confused or isolated. But the
That's right.
fantasy bit is the really one that kind of can lurk in the background. But like you said, if we're really sitting with ourselves, we can also admit that
Mm-hmm.
that's happening or that could be happening.
Well, the fantasy always usually leads to isolation, right? Because the thing that you might be fantasizing about, if we're just, for the sake of this conversation, we're just talking about people, because we can fantasize about a lot of different things. But
Mm,
if we're fantasizing about a particular relationship, it will most likely end up in isolation because the connection can't be truly met and matched because
mhm,
it's based in fantasy. So we end up feeling very alone again, right?
mhm. So how does one really start to connect with reality and get out of that fantasy like lens that they have?
Well, the way that we do it is we start by taking a look at their developmental parts and having that individual build a relationship with them. Because the reality of what I love that you've heard it a million times, probably on people who have been on your podcast, and I'm sure from Oprah, it's not what's wrong with the child, it's what happened to them.
Mhm.
Well, it's like that's true for all of us as adults too. We have to look at what happened so we can understand why we do what we do. And if we don't understand why we do what we do, then we'll go ahead and keep doing it with an honest attempt to have a corrective experience, but it just essentially is a do over again.
Yeah. So where does modeling come into play here? Which is, for those listening who don't understand, maybe know that term, it's what you saw growing up or didn't see.
Yeah, I think it plays a huge role. It plays a huge role, of course. It
Hmm.
plays a huge role, not just childhood, but also from other relationships as an adult.
Hmm.
You can take a look at how other people are in relationship, and if you are questioning your own ability or questioning yourself, then you're typically going to go in and look at what somebody else is doing and model after that, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be right for you. But if you have had caregivers as a young individual growing up, it's very difficult to not think that that's okay.
Right.
That's behavior that's okay, right?
Hmm.
Like maybe, or maybe, there's that we're drawn to what's familiar regardless of merit. So maybe it's just not something that we even think is right, but we find ourselves doing it
Hmm.
and we don't understand why. Like for
And I think that a
years,
lot of people can pack on shame for that because they're like, why do I keep doing this? I know I should do better. And they get in that spiral and then put shame on top of it all. And I mean, I've been in similar situations like that. You feel like you're going crazy.
that's right, that's right. And the shame is really under it all.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
because if our, depending on some of our, core beliefs of what we really think about ourselves, like I tell the story a lot about, oh my God, for years, I have to really take a deep breath and remind myself that I'm intelligent. There are a lot
Mm.
of things that I can bring good rational thinking to. I love a good problem solve, especially in people. I love that, right? I just love to see people's lights go on and get synthesized and organized. That's why we call it relational alignment. I totally dig that. But when you look at some of the stuff, I am dyslexic, and so when I was young, I really did not feel smart at all, and I was told, like, what's wrong with you? I had teachers that used to say, what's wrong with you? How come you're not getting this? And I had a mom that would drink too much. Unfortunately, that's what led her to her suicide, that would be very loving one minute and then just like question me. You should know better. Don't be stupid, Lori Jean. Like that message was
Mm.
imprinted. So when I became an adolescent, it became don't show anybody how stupid you are. And I would hide it. I would hide it. Do you understand, Lori Jean? Yes. I didn't have a freaking clue. So our
Mm.
messages, that learned modeling you're talking about, or behaviors, environments that we grow up in, those messages that we onboard kind of shape shift with our developmental years and
Mm.
become something still with us, but it becomes something that's more appropriate for our age and environment at the time. As an
Yeah.
adult, it was like, I'll show you that I'm not stupid. So I became the number one sales rep for the company I was working for and damn near killed myself.
Mm.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to be the best. I'm going to show. And I'm not even saying that to myself, right? Like, it's not like I'm going, oh, you have to prove, Lori Jean. It's just happening.
Yeah.
So much of what we do relationally, I think, just happens because of who we are and the road we've been down. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
100%. Yeah. And then a lot of what you mentioned, like you're not talking to yourself saying, oh, I'm going to prove and finally be enough. It's just kind of what happens because of the situations from the past.
That's right. But now that I understand my parts,
Mhm.
I, as a healthy adult, can actually speak to them. It's basically reparenting on steroids, right?
Yeah.
I mean, not real steroids, natural.
The saying, though, yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
Steroids of love,
That's,
that's for sure.
well, that's
Um,
right. Yeah.
there's also in your book, I really loved, this is for on page 225, I'll show it to you, but this chart that you created,
Hmm.
right? And for everybody tuning in that didn't see that, it's anxious attachment, ambivalent attachment, avoided attachment, and secure attachment. But it's in a diagram that's a spectrum of perception of self and perception of others, whether it's high or low or of either of those. I found that really fascinating. Of the anxious attachment, for example, again, I'll read it so that everybody can understand. The anxious attachment would have a low perception of self, but a high perception of others, and they feel, then do, then think. I was like, man, I found myself in that loop so many times. First time I saw that, I was like, yep. If you have a lower perception of others and a lower perception of self, that's the anxious avoidant, which is think, feel, do. I laughed at that one too. And getting caught in that loop.
Yeah.
The higher perception of self and a lower perception of others is the avoidant style. So it's think, then do, and then feel. Very heady, very protective, I would say. And then the
Yeah.
secure
And
attachment.
often mistaken for being narcissistic.
Ooh, let's dive into that in a second. I want to go to the secure
Oh,
attachment,
yeah.
which was a high perception of self and a high perception of others, which is think, feel, do all congruently as one. So the avoidant attachment, being confused as a narcissist. Can you go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, because a lot of times people will shut down and avoid being in relationship because they've been so wounded,
Mhm.
right? Or they've been raised by a helicopter parent, or they don't want to feel. They just don't want to feel. They're done. They're done. So when they come in to problem solve, or build a relationship, try to create emotional intimacy, there's no room for them, because often if they come in with somebody who's driving it, that person might be anxious,
Mhm.
and they're just not stopping. They're just not stopping. There's no room to breathe. So that they're all the more reason why, again, we're drawn to what's familiar, regardless of merit. There's a shutdown that goes on. And when they shut down like that, and this isn't for everybody, but it's for a lot of people. Our men's intensives all the time have at least 3 or 4 men out of the 6 that say, yeah. So when I've been told I was a narcissist by this girlfriend, my wife, even
Mhm.
my even my wife's therapist, who, by the way, never met the guy. You know, I mean, it's correct. Well, I won't use that word, but it's really sad. It's sad, is what it is. So because they shut down their feelings, there's this felt sense that they're just not caring. They're just don't care. They're only think about themselves. All of the criteria that goes into that, a lot of those boxes get checked off when they're really just showing up with energy to create safety for themselves. And, one of the things about that chart that I think it's important for your listeners to understand is that, when I worked at a mental health facility, we studied attachment for a while and did, some case studies around that. And it dawned on me one day, what if we took the concept of attachment and took it out of the psychology realm and put it into energy, so that people can understand in real time how they're connecting? Because,
Ooh.
Kevin, when you think about it, I know that I attach to people in all 4 ways.
Mm. Yeah.
I have two go-tos, secure and anxious. But I need to pivot out of my anxious into secure attachment if I want to have connection and be seen and heard, right?
Mhm.
So if we can understand the energy that we're running in the relationship that we're currently in, or how we're feeling about something even, we actually can pivot into that higher level of consciousness without shaming ourselves, because we can understand the energy. It's
Mhm.
easy to understand the energy. It's hard to navigate the world with some diagnostic tool that isn't useful in real time. I just think it's important to take a look at understanding what energy that you're running so you can understand how you're connecting in real time. If I go somewhere and I can feel that I'm avoiding someone at an event, I need to ask myself, why am I avoiding that person? What is it about that relationship for me? That's where the circle boundaries come in play. What is it about that relationship for me that's making me uncomfortable? Why am I uncomfortable? Is this something that I need to do to show up for myself and go have a conversation with? Do I just need to note it, take a deep breath, maybe go to the bathroom and take a moment for myself? Like, what is it that I need to do in order to get, relationally aligned? Because
Mhm.
oftentimes the energy that we feel relationally with other people, it can really destabilize us in the moments.
Right. And I love that you mentioned the labels, I guess, or diagnostics, and that's not really helpful in real time. Okay, it's like, yeah, I know that I'm showing up this way,
Mhm.
and going back to what we talked about before, it's like, and I'm keep doing it, and I don't want to keep doing it. So when somebody has that level of self-awareness of I'm doing it and I want to stop, but I can't, what's really happening there? How can they actually start to unpack that and pivot? How do you support somebody through that? And I know that's kind of tough because there's not a specific example unless you want to create one.
Well, say it one more time. Simplify that for me. I'll do it.
So yeah, somebody's in a pattern. They got self-awareness. I'm showing up in this certain way, and I don't want to show up in this certain way, but it keeps happening,
Mhm.
right? And they're aware of it. They know the diagnostic of what's happened. They understand it, but it keeps showing up.
Mhm.
How do they actually start to unravel that and unpack it in real time so that they can pivot and allow themselves to show up in a different way?
So in our languaging, it would be pivoting into their healthy adult. So say, for example, I go
Okay.
to this coffee shop every morning. Recently, I shouldn't say I, because this isn't it for me. Let's say Carol. Carol is in
Mhm.
love with Jack, and her and Jack have been together for 2 years. They go get coffee at this place, almost every morning. So Jack breaks up with Carol, and Carol decides that she's going to go to that coffee place because she really wants to see Jack, right? And she walking into that coffee shop, she's so anxious that she can't even breathe. So in that moment,
Mhm.
she has to be able to recognize that her wanting to go see Jack is actually not helping her in that moment. She has so much anxiousness running through her bones that there's a good chance she's going to take that anxiety into her work right after she gets the coffee, that she may or may not even see Jack there. And if she does see Jack, what's the intention there? What's her healthy adult doing there? He told her he needed space from her. He told her that he needed time to discern what to do with their relationship. And she's going in there guns a-blazing because she wants to get it right, and she wants it right now, and she can't manage her own act hunger to find out what's going on with Jack. And if we don't know ourselves well enough to know why we do what we do, and she, by the way, lost her dad when she was young to his alcoholism. So she's
Mhm.
feeling all that stuff. And if she knows that, she can go in there real time, go, wow, my inner child really wants this because I didn't have it when I was a child. My inner teen doesn't want to lose. And my healthy
Mhm.
adult needs to get the hell out of here. If there's ever going to be a chance for Jack and I to come together, like, again, it's about, it probably sounds so silly to your listeners. It's not, though. It's like, this is why we have to know ourselves and also understand our parts, because sometimes our parts have like different characters, right?
Yeah. When you talk about parts, for people who aren't familiar with that term, what is that?
There's a term called developmental psychology, and we have developmental stages that we all go through, and they're broken out into 3 stages: child, adolescent, and adult. Well, at Pivot, we look at it through 4 stages: child, adolescent, the adult, and then the healthy adult. Because sometimes as an adult, we're still running patterns from our adult self that aren't, we can't like say that this is happening because this is what happened to me as a child. My child was not that smart when I'm calling somebody 38 times in a row. you know,
Right.
you know,
Definitely.
yeah.
I could see that. So what you're really saying is noticing what's happening and being aware of all your parts and showing up for yourself ultimately, and giving those parts what they need, and also like really stopping to ask yourself why you're doing the things you're doing and who's doing what part of you is in control in that moment or showing up in that moment.
Yeah. I had a really tough week last week. I have a very close family member that we had to put into primary treatment for a substance use. And it was
Mm,
very hard. And I came home and asked my partner in tears if he would just give me a hug. It took me years to learn to ask for a hug.
mm,
I had so much pain that I just wanted to discharge it with some anger. I'm angry at the disease because, I was saying earlier, my mom committed suicide when I was a teenager. And I'm so grateful that I know that I need to feed that part of me, that inner child in me. And so when couples understand each other's parts, it creates so much safety and emotional connection and intimacy if they're both willing to understand it and help one another, not hurt each other,
mhm.
right? Sometimes my
Yeah.
team will come in and I'll be like, you know what? I need to, pardon my language for your listeners, but I just want to make it real. I need to fucking rant.
Yeah.
I got something going on and I want to offload it. Like, are you in a place where you can let me do that? Because half of it's going to just sound like a, and he'll be like, sure. And he'll sit down and I'll rant and I'll feel so much better afterwards. And then I'll be like, thank you for that. And then I can be in my healthy adult and we can go and have a loving evening. Like, we're not
Mhm.
supposed to be perfect.
Right. Where do you think that comes from, trying to be perfect? Because, at least from my perspective, I put a lot of that on myself from, I guess, being in this work, but also all of the advice that's out there. It can seem very much like, well, this is wrong, and you're doing this wrong, and this is showing up in this certain way. That I swam in that for a really long time, for the pressure of trying to be perfect.
Yeah. Mine came from being
And
overweight when I was younger and being called Fat Fanny,
mm, mm,
and feeling like I wasn't enough. That's where mine came
yeah,
from. I would need to know you better to understand where it actually stemmed from. But it usually, if it's a real deep thing where I've got to do it right, I think that it comes oftentimes from some specific events. And I think too, with your generation or the younger generations, I should say, having
yeah,
so much access to so much information, I'm
yeah.
not so sure that's as wonderful as we thought it would be. The wide world of the web is not as wonderful as we thought it would be.
I would agree with that. Definitely.
Mhm.
Can see it's definitely caused a divide.
Yeah, because there's so many different opinions and you don't really quite know which thing to try, which thing to test.
It's like if anybody's ever researched a certain diet and you're like trying to figure out that, well, this is bad for you, and this is bad for you, and this is bad for you, but this is good for you. No, that's bad for you. And it's like, well, what am I supposed to eat?
Exactly.
Because there are so many conflicting things. And to the point of what we started on, it's because everybody's different.
That's right.
I just think that there's not a lot of people taking that stance or truly of like that everybody's different and it really depends because it's more attention grabbing to make a bold statement
Hmm.
and it gets more likes.
That's right. Yeah. And hurts people,
Yeah.
can hurt people.
Yeah. Especially misguiding them, somebody who really wants support or needs support.
Hmm.
In all of this work, because again, I've read your book and I am so excited to dive deeper into the pivot process and everything else that you've created. I know you mentioned in the book very briefly about a potential next book about healthy couples.
Hmm.
Is there anything that you can share about that or any of the ideas that are going to come from that book?
Yes, yes, I can. I'm well into it. I'm excited about,
Oh, awesome.
yeah, I'm excited about it. It's really just about looking at the most common challenges that couples have, generally speaking, and then unpacking how to look at it from an individual perspective based on who you are, and a way to come together and connect and understand and meet each other's developmental parts, right?
Mm,
It's a lot of that.
awesome.
I hope it's good. Might not be for
Well, I
everyone.
mean,
One of the things about
yeah.
pivot is that it is a big ask, right? We're asking people to step up into their healthy adult and giving them a way to do it.
Yeah.
Like we're asking people to choose themselves. And for some people, that's a hard, tough ask. But at the end of the
Yeah.
day, I mean, I've met so many people, all different ages. And when I talk to anyone over 50 and they have regret about relationships, the number one thing all of them say to me is, you know what, LJ? I regret that I didn't choose myself. I regret that I didn't think about what was going to be best for me. For some reason, I thought that was selfish. And now I've learned that if I don't take care of me, and we all know this, but how do we actually really do it? Right? If I don't really learn what is going to be best for me relationally, then it's going to be tough to navigate relationships. Vetting relationships, especially partnerships, we spend more time buying a home. We get inspections when we buy a home. How do we inspect
Yeah.
each other? We have a dating module at Pivot that talks about how to do a deep dive inspection. Like, what is it?
Mm.
I used to go out and go, well, what do they have? What do I like about them? And I wasn't even like going, well, this is who I am. I was saying who I am based on what they thought they needed me to be. Like, I
Mm.
know that sounds so immature, but I hate to admit it, I did
A
it.
lot of people do
A
that.
lot of people do
A
that.
lot of people do that.
Hmm.
I mean, even again, going back to like some of the advice that's showing up online, it's all about how to find the right person and
Hmm.
not really about how to meet yourself and navigate that relationship once you do find the right person. Like it's a whole nother conversation. And I know that your book's definitely going to be talking about that process.
Hmm.
What are some of the commonalities that you listed out in the book, if you are open to sharing, like hardships and stuff that couples go through that you're going to be addressing in the book?
What's really interesting is the couples that come to us for work, one of the number one things they do is they get into a pattern gridlock. They get into a gridlock where their developmental parts are locking up and they're taking a juxtaposition to try to get out of it or win or feel better, and they don't see what they're doing.
Ooh, share a little bit more about that.
So if I'm in my inner child and feeling very quiet and alarmed and in fear, because that was my childhood, and they're in their inner teen just trying to get things done, get over it, not drop into emotion. They're fighting harder and I'm getting quieter, and we're in this gridlock where neither of us are coming together and connecting. And if we don't know where we
Mm.
are and can't give voice to it, then it creates conflict. And then we get into that conflict from a relational gridlock, and then that's where the hurt comes. That's
Mm.
where all the pain is. So
Wow.
that relational gridlock is a big one, is a really big one.
Yeah, that's huge. And I can definitely see how that could play out with a lot of people. And I don't think, again, like you said, they don't realize they're in it, I guess, until they see their parts.
That's right. And then, the other thing is, mine, theirs, and ours. Oftentimes we get into a relationship and we might want what we want and might not really understand why our partner wants what they want. And then definitely don't understand the sum of both of us. There's like three people in every relationship. There's you, me, and the sum of us, right? And the sum of us is sometimes the choice. And that requires compromise. That requires, surrendering. That requires, something a little different. And the goal isn't to always get to ours. Sometimes it needs to be, I need to hop over. If my partner's going through something really big, I very willingly want to table me for a minute. I want to put myself on the back burner for a minute. If I did that all the time, the relationship wouldn't work. But knowing when to choose, when I need to choose him, and for the listener, her or they or whatever, whoever your partner is, that's so helpful to know. And when we work with couples, we give them that tool kit based on their own individual developmental parts because it's going to be different for everyone. There I go again.
It's a good thing.
uh,
Yeah,
excuse
yeah.
me. Yeah. Yeah. Are you in a
No, that's
relationship
amazing.
now? Let's unpack you. No, just kidding.
I am. Let's
You
do it.
are?
Yes, I am.
Oh,
Uh-huh.
tell me about it.
It's been a year, a little over a year and a half now, and we met online and then were kind of long distance friends that turned into her flying to visit me for my birthday. And then that was like, okay, yeah, there's something here. I flew back and forth for a little bit and then we made it official. Very quickly made it like moved in together because she was wanting to move and we didn't want to do long distance.
Mhm.
And we got gridlocked, I guess I could say. And all of our parts that we were unaware of just roared head and it blew up. And I actually ended the relationship because I was like, well, I don't understand what all is happening. I don't want to hurt you further. And it was a really hard decision because part of me didn't want to do that. And then I had a grief process. I really found a lot of clarity in my life about myself and where I was coming from. I made a shift. And from that place, I was like, whoa, I do want to be with her. What am I doing?
Mm.
Like, and we repaired and got back together. And it was a slow process. And that was her request. And I'm grateful for that because I like to go fast and rush things. So I'm like, yeah, slow, got it. And that was about a year ago. And now we're in a place where we moved in together again. And things are, we're working through now in a much better place, first off, than the before, right? Like way better communication, way better understanding ourselves, all the unconscious ways we were trying to control the other person or make the other person like how we are instead of seeing them for who they are and loving them. And yeah, we're doing a lot of like shifts in the who we are now, year and a half after meeting each other is light years ahead of where we were before. It's really phenomenal.
Mm.
And I think part of that I can definitely give her credit for because she is all in the gene keys and astrology and understanding the uniqueness of an individual, which has helped me in understanding our dynamic.
Mhm.
So
Oh.
yeah.
Is she an astrologer?
Yeah, she's more into gene keys now, which is
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar, but yeah, she's been diving deeper into gene keys, but she's been an astrologer for the past I think 7-ish years or something like
Oh,
that.
wonderful. How interesting, right, for you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely very interesting. And I would say the most evolution I've ever had in a relationship
Hmm.
in who I am and how I'm showing up and everything from her being in my life.
Hmm. That's really cool.
Yeah,
That's really cool. I'm
it
happy
is.
for you. Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
neat. It's great when people partner and have like something new to offer, like a something big to offer, right?
Yeah.
Intellectually or something like that.
One of the things recently, and this is in Gene Keys, but my life's work is tenderness and hers is dynamism. And so she's over here trying to get me all excited and amped up and in a hyped up energy, and I'm trying to like being tender and calm, and she trying to calm her down, and like, and so it was interesting when we noticed that in the chart, and it was like, wow, that's just like our medicine, and it's beneficial for me to have that energy around, and also, yeah, be a little bit more dynamic,
Hmm.
and same for her. So it's cool how those intertwined
Yeah.
for
Well,
us.
that's really
Yeah,
cool. I love that. I love that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hmm.
What are you excited about with this new book coming out for people to have an aha about or to align with, as you were talking about before, to see them like light up and the aha moment turns on? What's exciting for you in that?
Oh, wow. This could be an emotional response, but my hope is that it will touch people and they will realize what they have, like your story, and not have to blow it up, right?
Mm.
And there's so many divorces and children that are getting so affected by people just not understanding why they do what they do. And my hope is that for couples, that it will help them understand that relational dynamic piece and how important it is to not overcook the chicken, not overthink it, but to really drop down into wanting to do all the things. The Brene Brown get curious, that all the things that we hear, really, really get to that place where you can love that person enough to at least give yourself a shot by being a little more open about who you are and where you come from and understand yourself and see how that dynamic can be healed, because there's so many people affected by brutal endings of relationships, They are emotional bombs. They are little mini wars that go on in these homes and all of these different places that people live. I mean, it is, the stories that I hear because of the work that we've done, it just breaks my heart. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't mean that people have to stay together, but at least they can dismount appropriately and we can have less pain, relational pain in the world. Because when I meet young people now, Kevin, they're like, oh my God, I don't think I want to have a relationship. And that,
Mm.
oh man, I'm like, there's so much to learn about your heart. You're the heart guy, you know this. There's so much to learn about your heart relationally with other people. And there's just people see so much pain because of one's inability to understand themselves. And my hope is that in this book, it will give some insight. Like the book you just read, I hope gave you a little bit of insight and invitation. And you've done the work, I can tell. But for people that read it, I want them to understand how dynamic they are and how important it is for
Yeah.
them to know themselves and own themselves. And in the couples book, it's important to understand how once you know who you are, how then can you come together in partnership? And not, by the way, not just romantic partnership, it could be even business partners. It could be, go into other realms. And I touch on that a little bit in the book too. So just long-winded answer, just stop some of the pain.
Yeah, that's real.
It's so real.
I know you developed the pivot process and also have other things going on. Could you share just a little bit more about where people can find out more about you and the work that you're doing and kind of get involved in any of this work?
Yeah, the best thing to do is just to go to lovetopivot.com and book a call with someone on our enrollment team. That's just the best way to do it. You can have a free
Awesome.
call and just get curious, see if it's a fit for you and the different ways that you can access it.
Beautiful.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast and sharing your heart and your message. Again, for everybody tuning in, hashtag healthy adult is the book, and the new book will be on the lookout for. And so I will be tagging on social media and everything. So be sure to follow to be in the loop for the couples book. But again, Lori Jean, thank you so much for being here. This was an honor and a pleasure. And I really enjoyed this conversation.
Likewise, Kevin. Thank you. So nice to meet you.